Greetings from San Francisco Children's Art Center. I'm teacher Amy, and in this video we're going to make baker's clay. Baker's clay is a dough-like sculpting material made from 3 simple ingredients: flour, salt, and water. You can use it to make all kinds of 3-dimensional expressions, and it can either be air-dried or you can bake it in a low-temperature oven to a hard finish. And when it's done, it looks a little something like this, and you can hear how hard it becomes. It can also be painted once it's hardened. So I like to use a recipe that was used by one of my art heroes. Her name was Ruth Asawa, and she was an artist from here in San Francisco. And Ruth used baker's clay in her work with young people in the schools and also in her own sculptural work. If you've ever been down to Union Square, you can see a big fountain that Ruth made. It's near the Hyatt Hotel, and Ruth used baker's clay to mold all kinds of tiny little scenes from all around San Francisco with people and buildings that we know and love in our city. She then sent all of those little baker's clay pieces to a foundry where they cast them all in solid bronze to make this fountain. So I encourage you all to go to the website called ruthasawa.com, and you can learn more about the artist and her work. And you'll also find the recipe we're using today on her website, but we'll share it here as well. So today I'm going to make a half batch of Ruth's recipe since it's just me who will be working with it. The clay is always best to use when it's freshly made. If it's been sitting around a while, it begins to get a little too sticky and it doesn't hold the shape as well of whatever you're creating. So let's get started. All right, so we'll start with a big bowl. And into this bowl, we're gonna measure out 2 cups of flour. Ruth's recipe calls for 4, but I'm doing half of that. So 2 cups of flour and a half cup of salt. Again, the recipe calls for a full cup, but I'll use half of that. And you're gonna wanna mix that so that the flour and water, or sorry, not the flour and water, the flour and the salt are totally mixed through together. So there's little bits of flour and little bits of salt all mixed through. Okay, now that that's all mixed, we'll add the water and we'll stir as we add. This is 3/4 of a cup of water, which is half of the recipe again. I'm gonna mix it all together. I'm using a fork to mix. I wanna get all of that mixed in with each other. Oops, getting a little messy here, but that's okay. And you'll see it's starting to come together. I'm gonna put just the tiniest bit more water in. It's always okay to use a little more water than you think you might need because it's easy enough to add more flour and more salt to make it firmer. But once it's mixed, it's kind of hard to add more water to make it softer if it feels too stiff. So if it seems like it's not soft enough, go ahead and add a little more water, because you can always add a little more flour and salt later if you've got it. All right, now that it's starting to come together, you're gonna get your hands kind of messy. You're gonna pop them in here. And you're gonna start to mix and try to get this to come together into a ball. Gonna get down into the bottom of the bowl, add a little bit more flour if you need to, but you wanna get this all worked up into a nice bowl. See how it's starting to firm up? Now that your clay is all ready to go, you might want to just feel around with it a little bit. Touch it, squeeze it, see how it works to make a ball, see how it works to make a snake, see how it works to push it flat into a pancake. Get a feel for the baker's clay and what it can do. One thing that you're going to want to think about when you're making your sculpture is you kind of have to make it a little bit flat. This is a little bit of a squishy clay. If you try to build something tall, it's going to flop over. If you try to make something that's too thick, it's gonna crack as it dries. So you wanna make something that's no thicker than 2 fingers and it wants to be flat. So knowing that that's what this clay can do, your next thing is to think about what it is that you might want to create with the clay. Pause this video. Think of several different ideas and imagine what each might look like. Then make a decision about which you'll try. When you have your idea in mind, come on back to the video. What will you make with your baker's clay? So maybe you decided to make your favorite animal, or maybe it's something you see in nature, or maybe it's something from your imagination. Maybe it's a portrait of yourself. I tend to like to make portraits of myself. It's a good way to think about who you are and how you want to show yourself in the world. So what I'm going to show you is how to work with this clay, and I'll just be making a portrait of me as I do it, but you do whatever you want with your clay. So before you get started, you'll want to gather a few materials that you'll need for sculpting your clay. First, you need to choose a base. If you're going to let it air dry, a piece of cardboard works great. You'll want to be able to build it on top of this so that you can move it. If you're planning on baking in the oven so it gets harder faster, you want to put it on something like a cookie sheet or an aluminum pan so it can go into the oven. If you're going to bake it, don't use cardboard. Use something metal that can go into the oven. You'll also need some cutting tools and some rolling tools. So a great cutting tool is just your average knife that you can get from your kitchen drawer, not sharp so kids can use it easily. Plastic knife works great as well. And for a rolling tool, you can always just flatten it out with your hands, but I just pulled this out of my recycling bin. You can always use this tool, like a side of a bottle, for rolling as well, if you want to get it nice and flat. Another thing you'll want to think about is some texture tools. How can you impress some textures into this? Here's some bubble wrap. You can push that into the clay. And you can see the texture it makes there. You can use, here's a straw to make holes. You can use Legos. Legos make cool textures on both sides. You can even have this tiny little button that's flower shaped, so you could make flower shape. So even before you start sculpting, you can start playing around with some of your tools. Oh, another great one is a fork. Fork makes very cool texture in baker's clay. All right, so once you've got a little knowledge about what your tools can do, the last thing you'll need is just a little bit of water, and I'll show you how. So if I were going to make a portrait of myself or an animal or something, I always like to start with a nice flat base. I'm going to make mine a circle because my face is pretty round. You can flatten that with your hands. If you want it smoother than that, you can roll it with a bottle. Or if you have a rolling pin, you can, but a bottle works just fine. And if you don't like how it's a little crooked, you can always use a knife to cut the edges and make them smooth. See how you can just cut away. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Now, I can add things to my background. I could always go and make some texture. Maybe I'll just give my face a little texture. I'll use a little bubble wrap to do that. Ooh, that's going to be interesting. Another fun thing to press into baker's clay are things like leaves or other things you find in nature. That gives it a little bit more interest. Now I'm going to make some of my features. I can make an eye. I'm going to roll a ball for an eye. And when I want to attach one piece to another, I get my finger a little bit wet, and I get the spot wet where I want to put it, and I get that a little wet. And what happens is it helps those pieces to melt together and stay in place. So there's one eye. I'm going to make another eye. I'll roll a ball, touch it here, squish it down there. There's some fun eyes. Totally doesn't matter that they're different sizes. Makes it expressive. A little bit of pupil maybe, pupil there, a pupil there. Think about what else you need. A nose, a mouth, hair. I might add some hair. I'm gonna roll some snakes to make some hair. I'm gonna roll them out like this. Cut them. Hair, 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 hair. Don't forget to wet it. Put some here, wet it, and put some here, wet it, and put some here, cut some hair, put some more here and here. There's my hair. See how I'm not going too tall? It's no thicker than 1 or 2 fingers. Time for a nose. I'm gonna make my nose a triangle shape. Oops, don't forget to wet it. And I'm gonna use my straw to make some funny nostrils. Boop, boop. And let's remember the mouth. I'm gonna be smiling because I like to smile. And I think, oops, guess what I forgot to do? Get it wet. And I'm gonna use my fork to make some teeth. There's my smiling mouth. So you can spend lots of time adding lots of details. The more details you add to your baker's clay, the more textures you add, the more elements that you stick onto your background, the more interesting your sculpture will be. I hope you have lots of fun making this. Oops, yeah, I'm gonna make some eyeballs like that. Does it look like me? Totally okay if it doesn't. I had an awesome time making myself in this clay. All right, so if you want to let it air dry, you just let it dry. This will probably take in nice warm weather. This will probably take about a week to get totally dry. Or you can put it in the oven at about 250 degrees, so long as it's not on cardboard, but on metal. And it'll probably take like an hour or so to bake. How long it'll take to bake will depend on how thick your piece is. You'll want to just check it every like 5 or 10 minutes or so. And when you put your finger, you'll know it's done. When you put your finger in it and you don't see that fingernail mark, that's how you know it's done and ready to go. So once your baker's clay is dry, either air dried for a week or so or in the oven for a few hours, it's going to be nice and hard like this. And you could leave it exactly like this. I think it looks beautiful just plain white. But if you wanted to paint it, there's a couple different ways you could paint it. You could use acrylic craft paints. You could use liquid watercolor paints, or I'm going to show you how I'm going to use like a tray of watercolors to paint this one. So you'll need your watercolor tray. You'll need a cup of water. You'll need your brush. And I like to have a paper towel. All right, so I've started to paint my thing. I just want to show you really quick with your watercolor trays. You want to use less water and a little more color. Check out the colors that I've chosen to paint my figure. I decided I'm going to have a green face, and I might have bright red hair, and I might have purple lips. It's totally awesome to get really creative and imaginative with the colors that you choose. It doesn't have to look like it looks in real life. It can look like something from your imagination. Maybe you paint it the colors you feel versus the colors that it looks like for reals. So notice as I go, I rub it in the tray a bunch of times. Lots of times people don't use quite enough rubbing in the dry paints, and then their colors get really soft and washed out looking. So you keep painting until it's totally covered. Pause. Once you're totally done painting, you're going to want to let it dry. It's going to last a while, just like that. But if you want it to last for many, many years, you're going to have an adult put a coat of polyurethane, like a clear coat on top of it. Something you can get from the hardware store that'll help seal everything up and keep it lasting for a long time. So I hope you had so much fun making baker's clay. Be sure to share photos of what you've made with us. You can email them to sfcac@childrensartcenter.org, and we'll share them on the community page on our website, where you can share with other kids in the city what you've been making and see what they've been creating at home as well. I hope you have fun and join us again for some more creative time together. Thanks again.